the crowded streets of Buenos Aires, Argentina, there lived a little girl who had nothing but a dream that was too big for her tiny hands. Her name was Elena Vasquez, and she was born into a family that counted every coin twice before spending it. Her father worked long hours at a factory that made car parts. Her mother cleaned houses for wealthy families across the city. Together, they barely earned enough to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. Their apartment was small. Just 2 rooms that held 5 people. Elena shared a bed with her 2 younger brothers, and most nights, she would lie awake listening to the sounds of the city outside her window. Car horns, street vendors, dogs barking in the distance, but above all the noise, there was one sound that called to her more than anything else: music. It came from the apartment next door, where an old man played his radio every evening. Sometimes it was tango. Sometimes it was classical. Sometimes it was old folk songs that made her heart ache in ways she did not understand. Elena would press her ear against the thin wall and close her eyes, letting the melodies wash over her like warm rain. When she was 5 years old, something happened that would change her life forever. Her grandmother lived in a slightly bigger apartment on the other side of town. She was a proud woman who had once dreamed of being a concert pianist herself, back when she was young and the world seemed full of possibilities. But life had other plans. She got married young, had children, and her dreams slowly faded like old photographs left in the sun. But she never got rid of her piano. It was an old upright piano, battered and worn, with several keys that no longer worked properly. The wood was scratched, the pedals were stiff, and it had not been tuned in over 15 years. To most people, it was just a piece of junk, taking up space, but to Elena, the moment she saw it, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. She still remembers that day clearly. Her mother had taken her to visit her grandmother while she went to a job interview nearby. Elena was supposed to sit quietly and behave herself, but when she saw that piano sitting in the corner of the room, covered with a dusty cloth, she could not help herself. She walked toward it slowly, as if approaching a sleeping animal. Her grandmother watched her with curious eyes but said nothing. Elena reached out and touched one of the keys. The note that came out was slightly out of tune, but to her, it sounded like magic. For the next hour, she sat at that piano and pressed every key she could reach. She had no idea what she was doing. She had never had a music lesson in her life. She did not know the names of the notes or how to read sheet music. But something inside her just knew. By the time her mother came back, Elena had figured out how to play a simple melody she had heard on the radio. It was not perfect. She made mistakes, but the fact that she had done it at all, with no training, at just 5 years old, was nothing short of remarkable. Her grandmother cried that day. She held Elena's small hands in her wrinkled ones and said, "You have a gift, my child. A gift from God. Promise me, you will never waste it." Elena promised. From that day on, every weekend, every holiday, every spare moment she had, Elena went to her grandmother's apartment to practice. The old woman taught her everything she remembered from her own childhood lessons. It was not much, but it was enough to get Elena started. The girl learned fast. Faster than anyone expected. Within a year, she was playing songs that took most students 3 or 4 years to master. Within 2 years, she was composing her own simple melodies. By the time she was 8, the neighbors in her grandmother's building would gather outside the door just to listen to her practice. Word began to spread about the little girl with the golden fingers. People in the neighborhood started calling her La Pequeña Maestra, the little master. Street vendors would stop their carts to listen. Children would pause their games. Even the stray dogs seemed to quiet down when Elena played. But life was not easy for her family. Money was always tight. There were months when they could barely afford rice and beans. There were times when Elena had to miss school to help her mother with cleaning jobs. There were nights when she went to bed hungry, her stomach growling, her fingers itching to play a piano that was across town. Still, she never complained. She understood that her parents were doing everything they could, and she made a silent promise to herself that one day, she would make enough money to take care of all of them. One day, her music would lift them out of poverty. When Elena was 12 years old, something miraculous happened. A music professor from the Conservatorio Nacional, one of the most respected music schools in all of Argentina, was visiting a friend in her grandmother's neighborhood. As he walked past the old apartment building, he heard something that stopped him in his tracks. Piano music. But not just any piano music. It was Chopin. One of the most difficult pieces in the classical repertoire, and it was being played with a level of emotion and skill that he had rarely heard, even from his most advanced students. He followed the sound to its source and knocked on the door. When Elena's grandmother opened it, the professor saw a skinny 12-year-old girl sitting at a broken piano, completely lost in the music, unaware that anyone was watching. He listened until she finished. Then he asked her one simple question. "Who is your teacher?" Elena looked at him with confused eyes. "I do not have a teacher," she said. "I taught myself." The professor did not believe her at first. He asked her to play something else. She did. Then something else. She did that too. He asked her to sight read a piece she had never seen before. She stumbled a bit, but she got through it. He asked her about music theory, expecting her to know nothing. She knew more than some of his second-year students. By the end of that afternoon, the professor had made a decision. He offered Elena a full scholarship to the Conservatorio Nacional. All her tuition, all her books, all her fees, everything would be paid for. She would receive the finest musical education in the country, completely free of charge. Elena's mother wept when she heard the news. Her father, a man who rarely showed emotion, hugged his daughter so tight she thought she might break. Her grandmother simply smiled and said, "I knew it. I always knew." And so began a new chapter in Elena's life. She threw herself into her studies with a dedication that amazed everyone around her. While other students practiced for 2 or 3 hours a day, Elena practiced for 8. While other students went to parties and made friends, Elena stayed in the practice rooms until the janitors kicked her out at midnight. Some people called her obsessed. Some people said she was wasting her youth. But Elena did not care what anyone thought. She had made a promise to herself and to her family. She was going to become one of the greatest pianists in the world, and nothing was going to stop her. By the time she was 19, Elena had won 3 national piano competitions. Critics were calling her a once-in-a-generation talent. Magazine articles were being written about her incredible journey from poverty to prominence. People were already comparing her to the legends of classical music. And then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, she received a letter that made her heart stop. It was an invitation to compete in the International Chopin Piano Competition in Warsaw, Poland. This was not just any competition. This was the most prestigious piano competition on earth, the place where legends were made, the stage where careers were launched. Elena read the letter 3 times to make sure it was real. Then she fell to her knees and cried. Everything she had ever worked for, every sacrifice she had ever made, every hungry night and exhausted morning, it had all been leading to this moment. Her dream was finally within reach. She had no idea that in just 3 months, that dream would be ripped away from her in the most devastating way possible. The weeks following that letter were the happiest of Elena's life. She walked around the conservatory with a smile that would not leave her face. She practiced with a new kind of fire burning inside her. Every scale, every chord, every phrase felt more meaningful now. She was not just playing music anymore. She was preparing for the moment that would define her entire existence. The International Chopin Competition in Warsaw. Just saying those words out loud made her shiver with excitement. She called her mother the night she received the invitation. Her mother screamed so loud that the neighbors came knocking to make sure everything was okay. Her father got on the phone and told her, in his quiet way, that he had never been prouder of anyone in his entire life. Her grandmother, now 83 years old and growing fragile, whispered through tears that she could finally die in peace, knowing that Elena had made it. "Do not talk about dying," Elena laughed. "You need to be there to watch me win." Her grandmother promised she would. Elena threw herself into preparation with everything she had. She woke up at 5 in the morning and went straight to the practice rooms. She stayed there until midnight, sometimes later. She barely ate. She barely slept. She barely spoke to anyone who was not directly helping her prepare. Her professors warned her to slow down. Her friends told her she was pushing too hard. But Elena did not listen. She had come too far and sacrificed too much to hold back now. This was her one chance, her one shot at everything she had ever dreamed of. She was not going to waste a single second. 3 months. That was all the time she had. 90 days to perfect a program that would normally take years to polish. 90 days to prove that a poor girl from Buenos Aires belonged on the same stage as the greatest pianists in the world. She could do it. She knew she could. And then, about 10 weeks before the competition, something strange started happening. It began small. So small that Elena almost did not notice it at first. A slight cramp in her right hand during a particularly difficult passage. A momentary stiffness in her fingers that went away after she shook them out. A tiny tremor that lasted only a second or two. She told herself it was nothing. Just tiredness. Just the result of practicing too many hours without rest. She would take a short break, drink some water, and everything would be fine. But it was not fine. The cramps came more often. The stiffness lasted longer. The tremors grew stronger. Some days, her right hand would curl into a strange position without her permission, the fingers bending in ways that made no sense. She would have to use her left hand to physically straighten them out. Still, she kept practicing. She was Elena Vasquez. She had overcome poverty. She had taught herself to play piano on a broken instrument. She had earned a scholarship through pure talent and determination. A little hand cramp was not going to stop her. But then came the morning that changed everything. She was in the middle of practicing Chopin's Ballade No. 1, the centerpiece of her competition program. It was a piece she had played hundreds of times before. She knew every note, every phrase, every tiny nuance by heart. Her fingers had traveled this musical journey so many times that they could do it in her sleep. She reached the climax of the piece, a thundering cascade of notes that required perfect coordination between both hands. Her left hand moved flawlessly, dancing across the keys with power and precision. But her right hand stopped, not slowed down, not stumbled, stopped completely. It was as if someone had reached inside her arm and switched off the power. Her fingers froze in place, curled into a claw-like shape, completely unresponsive to her brain's commands. And then came the pain. It started in her wrist and shot up her forearm like liquid fire. She gasped and pulled her hand away from the keyboard, cradling it against her chest. Tears sprang to her eyes, not just from the physical pain, but from a deeper terror that was rising inside her. What was happening to her? She tried to move her fingers. They would not obey. She tried to straighten her hand. It would not cooperate. For what felt like an eternity, she sat there on the piano bench, staring at her own hand as if it belonged to a stranger. Finally, after several minutes, the cramp released. Her fingers slowly uncurled. The pain faded to a dull ache. Elena sat there trembling, sweat dripping down her forehead, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew then that she could not ignore this anymore. Something was seriously wrong. The next day, she went to see a doctor. He examined her hand, asked her some questions, and sent her to a specialist. The specialist ran some tests and sent her to another specialist. That specialist ran more tests and sent her to a neurologist. By the time Elena finally sat down in the neurologist's office, 2 weeks had passed. 2 weeks of waiting. 2 weeks of worrying. 2 weeks of pretending everything was okay while her right hand continued to betray her. The neurologist was a kind man, with gray hair and gentle eyes. He had her medical file open on his desk. He had seen the test results. He had consulted with other experts, and now he had to deliver news that no doctor ever wants to give. "Elena," he said softly, "I am afraid I have some difficult news for you." She already knew. Somewhere, deep inside, she had known for weeks, but hearing it out loud, from a medical professional, in that cold and sterile office, made it real, in a way that she was not prepared for. The diagnosis was focal dystonia, a neurological condition that causes involuntary muscle contractions in specific parts of the body. In Elena's case, it affected her right hand, specifically the fine motor movements required for playing piano. But what does that mean? Elena asked, even though she was afraid of the answer. Can it be fixed? Is there a surgery? Some kind of medicine? The neurologist sighed. He had treated many musicians with this condition over the years. He knew how devastating it was. He knew that the words he was about to say would shatter this young woman's world. There is no cure, he said quietly. The condition can sometimes be managed with therapy and medication. Some patients see improvement over time. But I need to be honest with you, Elena. For pianists especially, this condition is often. He paused, searching for the right word. Permanent. Elena felt the room start to spin. But the competition. Warsaw. It is in 8 weeks. I have been preparing my whole life for this. The doctor shook his head slowly. I am sorry. You need to withdraw from the competition. In fact, you need to stop playing altogether. The more you use your hand in that way, the worse the condition will become. He leaned forward and looked her directly in the eyes. My professional advice is this. Never play again. Never play again. The words hit her like a physical blow. She felt all the air leave her body. She felt her heart crack right down the middle. She felt 20 years of dreams, of sacrifices, of blood and sweat and tears, crumble into dust right before her eyes. She does not remember leaving the doctor's office. She does not remember the bus ride home. She does not remember unlocking the door to her small apartment or collapsing onto her bed. What she does remember is the darkness that swallowed her whole. The days that followed were the worst of her life. She stopped eating. She stopped sleeping. She stopped answering phone calls from her family, her professors, her friends. She pulled the curtains closed and lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling absolutely nothing. Her piano sat in the corner of her apartment, silent and still. She could not bear to look at it. She could not bear to touch it. One night, in a moment of grief so overwhelming that it frightened her, she grabbed a bedsheet and threw it over the instrument, covering it completely, out of sight, but never out of mind. She had spent her entire life building her identity around one thing. She was Elena Vasquez, the pianist, the prodigy, the girl who was going to be a star. Without music, who was she? What was she? What reason did she have to get out of bed in the morning? The answer, in those dark days, was nothing. She was nothing. She had nothing. And she saw no way forward. Her mother came to visit after Elena stopped returning her calls. She found her daughter thin and pale, barely able to speak, the apartment a mess, the piano hidden under a sheet like a ghost. She held Elena in her arms and let her cry. She did not offer solutions. She did not try to fix anything. She simply sat there, being a mother, while her daughter's heart broke into a million pieces. What am I supposed to do now? Elena whispered through her tears. Music was everything to me. It was my whole life. And now, it is gone. Her mother stroked her hair and said nothing. Because in that moment, there was nothing anyone could say. The girl who had once silenced rooms with her playing was now silenced herself, and she had no idea if she would ever find her voice again. 2 years passed. 2 years of silence. 2 years of emptiness. 2 years of waking up every morning and wondering what the point of it all was. Elena had dropped out of the conservatory. She could not bear to walk those halls anymore. To pass by the practice rooms where she had once spent every waking hour. To see the pitying looks on the faces of professors and students who knew what had happened to her. She moved out of her apartment and into a smaller, cheaper room on the outskirts of the city. It was not much. Just 4 walls, a tiny bathroom, and a window that looked out onto a gray alleyway. But it was all she could afford now, because Elena Vasquez, the girl who was supposed to become one of the greatest pianists in the world, was now working as a waitress at a small cafe near the bus station. The job paid barely enough to cover her rent and food. The hours were long. The customers were often rude. Her feet ached at the end of every shift, and her hands, those hands that had once danced across piano keys with impossible grace, now carried trays of coffee and plates of sandwiches. Sometimes, late at night, she would look at her hands under the dim light of her room. Her right hand still cramped occasionally. The fingers still curled in strange ways when she was tired or stressed, but it did not matter anymore. Those hands had no purpose now. She tried other jobs too. She cleaned offices in the early mornings before her cafe shifts. She handed out flyers on street corners. She did whatever she could to keep busy, to keep moving, to keep her mind from wandering back to the things she had lost. But music was everywhere. She heard it on the radio at the cafe. She heard it from passing cars. She heard it from a street musician who played guitar on the corner near her bus stop. Every melody, every chord, every rhythm was a reminder of everything she could no longer have. Some nights, she would put her pillow over her head and try to block out the sounds. Other nights, she would cry herself to sleep, her body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere so deep inside her that she did not even know that place existed. Her family tried to help. Her mother called every day. Her father sent money when he could, even though Elena knew he could not afford it. Her grandmother, now very old and very frail, wrote her letters filled with love and encouragement. But nothing helped. Nothing could fill the hole that music had left behind. Elena was not living anymore. She was just existing, going through the motions, waking up, working, sleeping, and doing it all over again. Day after day, week after week, month after month, she had given up. And then came the night that everything changed. It was 3 a.m. Elena had been lying awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The city outside was quiet. Even the stray dogs had stopped barking. The whole world seemed to be holding its breath. She got out of bed without knowing why. Her feet carried her across the cold floor of her tiny room, past the small kitchen area, to the corner where a large shape sat hidden under a white bedsheet. The piano. She had brought it with her when she moved. She did not know why. She could not play it. She could not even look at it. But something inside her could not bear to leave it behind. So there it sat, covered and silent, like a grave marker for the person she used to be. Elena stood there for a long time, just staring at the sheet. Her heart was pounding. Her hands were trembling. Every instinct told her to turn around and go back to bed, to forget, to move on. But something else, something small and stubborn that had been hiding deep inside her all this time, whispered a different message. Try. Just try. She reached out with shaking fingers and grabbed the edge of the sheet. Slowly, carefully, she pulled it away. The fabric fell to the floor. And there it was. Her grandmother's old piano, the same battered instrument where she had played her first notes as a 5-year-old girl. The keys were dusty. Some of them were more yellow than white now. But when she pressed one with her left hand, the note that rang out was clear and true. She sat down on the bench. Her right hand lay useless in her lap, but her left hand hovered over the keyboard, fingers spread, ready. She played a single chord, then another, then a simple melody. Just a few notes. Nothing complicated. Nothing impressive. Just sound. Just music. And something inside Elena broke open. The tears came fast and heavy. She cried so hard that she could barely breathe. But she did not stop playing. Her left hand kept moving, picking out notes, finding patterns, creating something from nothing. It was not beautiful. It was not skillful. It was the playing of someone who had been away from music for 2 years and was just finding her way back. But in that moment, it was the most precious sound Elena had ever heard, because it meant she was not dead yet. It meant there was still something inside her that wanted to live. When the sun came up that morning, Elena was still sitting at the piano. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her body was exhausted, but her mind was clearer than it had been in 2 years. She could not play the way she used to. That was a fact. Her right hand was damaged, and the doctor said it might never fully recover. But who said there was only one way to play piano? The thought hit her like lightning. She had been so focused on what she could not do, that she had never stopped to consider what she still could do. Her left hand was fine, strong, even. Years of practice had made it just as skilled as her right hand used to be. And there was an entire repertoire of piano music written specifically for the left hand alone. What if she could relearn? What if she could adapt? What if she could find a new way to make music? Even with a broken hand, it seemed impossible. It seemed crazy. Every logical part of her brain said it could not be done. But Elena had never been very good at listening to logic. The next morning, she went to the library and started researching. She learned about other pianists who had suffered injuries and found ways to continue playing. She read about Paul Wittgenstein, a famous pianist who lost his right arm in a war and went on to commission new pieces written just for the left hand. She discovered that there were hundreds of beautiful compositions designed for 5 fingers instead of 10. She was not alone. Others had walked this road before her. She also started looking into the science of her condition. She read medical journals and research papers. She learned that the brain was capable of something called neuroplasticity, the ability to form new pathways and adapt to injury. Some musicians with focal dystonia had found ways to retrain their brains, to work around the damaged areas, to recover at least some of their abilities. It would not be easy. It would take years, maybe longer. There were no guarantees. But there was hope. And hope was something Elena had not felt in a very long time. She found a physical therapist who specialized in working with musicians. She found a neurologist who was willing to try unconventional treatments. She found a piano teacher who had experience helping injured performers adapt their technique. Slowly, painfully, Elena began to rebuild herself. The progress was agonizing. Some days, she could only practice for 5 minutes before the cramps in her right hand became unbearable. Some days, she felt like she was moving backward instead of forward. Some days, she wanted to throw the sheet back over the piano and give up all over again. But she did not give up. Every time she wanted to quit, she remembered that night at 3 a.m. She remembered the feeling of pressing that first key. She remembered the way the music had brought her back to life. She was not going to let that go. Not again. Not ever. It took 6 months before she could play a simple piece all the way through. It took a year before she started to feel like a real pianist again. It took 2 years before she was ready to perform in front of anyone other than herself. But she got there. Note by note, day by day, she got there. And she had no idea that the biggest challenge of her life was still waiting for her just around the corner. 3 years had passed since the diagnosis that nearly ended her life. Elena was not the same person she had been before. She was stronger in some ways, more fragile in others. She had learned to play piano again, but differently. Her left hand did most of the work now, carrying melodies that used to be shared between both hands. Her right hand helped when it could, offering support in moments that did not require the fine, rapid movements that triggered her condition. It was not perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was music. And that was enough. She had started performing again. In small ways. A coffee shop on Sunday afternoons. A retirement home on Wednesday evenings. A tiny concert hall that held maybe 50 people on a good night. Nothing grand. Nothing like the stages she had once dreamed of. But every performance felt like a victory. She had also gone back to teaching. Young students. Mostly. Children who reminded her of herself at that age. Full of wonder and possibility. She taught them not just how to play piano, but how to love music. How to find joy in every note. How to keep going even when things got hard. Life was quiet. Life was simple. And Elena had made peace with that. Then one evening, everything changed again. She was sitting in her small apartment, grading sheet music from her students, when her phone rang. The name on the screen made her heart skip. It was Professor Morales, the man who had discovered her all those years ago, who had given her the scholarship that changed her life. They had stayed in touch over the years, though their conversations had become less frequent as time went on. He was retired now, living in a small house outside the city, tending to his garden and his memories. "Elena," he said when she answered. His voice sounded strange. Excited, almost. "I need to tell you something. And I need you to promise me you will not be angry." She laughed nervously. That is a strange way to start a conversation. Promise me. Okay, I promise. There was a pause. Then he spoke. Do you remember the international Chopin competition? The one in Warsaw? Elena felt her stomach tighten. Of course she remembered. How could she ever forget? It was the dream that had been stolen from her. The future that had been erased. Yes, she said quietly. I remember. Well, the professor continued. This year they are doing something different. They have created a new category. A special section for musicians who have overcome significant physical challenges, performers who have found ways to continue making music despite injuries or disabilities. Elena's heart began to beat faster. She was not sure where this was going, but she had a feeling she was not going to like it. The committee reached out to conservatories around the world asking for recommendations, the professor said. They wanted names of musicians whose stories might inspire others. Musicians who had faced impossible odds and refused to give up. He paused again. I submitted your name, Elena, 3 months ago. And yesterday, I received word that you have been accepted. The phone nearly slipped from her hand. You did what? I know I should have asked you first. But I also knew you would say no. You would tell me that you are not ready. That you are not good enough. That your time has passed. So I made the decision for you. Elena could not speak. Her mind was racing in 100 different directions. The competition is in 6 months, the professor continued. They want you there, Elena. They want to hear your story. They want to see what you can do. I cannot, she whispered. It has been too long. I am not the pianist I used to be. I will embarrass myself. I will embarrass you, Elena. His voice was firm now, the way it used to be when he was teaching her. I have watched you play at that little coffee shop. I have seen the videos your students post online. You are different now, yes, but different does not mean lesser. Sometimes, different means better. She wanted to argue. She wanted to list all the reasons why this was a terrible idea, but somewhere deep inside her, in that small, stubborn place that had refused to let her give up 3 years ago, a tiny flame flickered to life. Warsaw. The International Chopin Competition. The stage where legends were made. Could she really do this? Think about it. The professor said. That is all I ask. Do not say no right away. Just think about it. Argon self. She thought about it. For 3 days, she thought about nothing else. She barely slept. She barely ate. She paced around her apartment, talking to herself, weighing the possibilities, imagining all the ways it could go wrong. But she also imagined how it could go right. On the 4th day, she called the professor back. I will do it, she said. I do not know if I can succeed, but I will try. The next 6 months were the hardest of Elena's life. She quit her job at the cafe. She reduced her teaching hours to almost nothing. Every spare moment, every ounce of energy, went into preparation. The challenge was enormous. She had to put together a full competition program, 45 minutes of music that would showcase her abilities. But she could not simply play the pieces the way they were written. Her right hand could not handle long passages of rapid notes. She had to find ways to adapt. She spent weeks studying each piece, figuring out which parts her left hand could carry alone, and which parts absolutely required her right hand. She redistributed notes between her fingers. She changed the timing of certain passages to give her right hand moments of rest. She invented new fingerings that no one had ever used before. Some purists would probably call it cheating. They would say she was not playing the music as the composer intended. But Elena did not care about purists. She cared about making music, and if she had to break a few rules to do it, so be it. She also worked harder than ever on her physical therapy. She did exercises every morning to strengthen her right hand and increase its endurance. She practiced relaxation techniques to prevent the cramping that still threatened to lock up her fingers. She learned to recognize the warning signs that told her when to push forward and when to pull back. There were setbacks, many of them. Days when her hand refused to cooperate. Days when she had to stop practicing after just 20 minutes. Days when she sat at her piano and cried because it all felt so impossibly hard. But she kept going, one day at a time, one note at a time. The night before her flight to Warsaw, Elena sat alone in her apartment and played through her entire program from start to finish. Her left hand danced across the keys with confidence and grace. Her right hand contributed where it could, delicate and careful, never pushing beyond its limits. When she finished, she sat in silence for a long moment. It was not perfect, but it was hers. Every note carried the weight of everything she had been through. Every phrase told a piece of her story. This was not just a performance. It was a testament to the human spirit. She was ready, or at least, she thought she was. When Elena arrived in Warsaw, she felt the doubt creeping in almost immediately. The competition venue was a grand concert hall in the heart of the city. Massive stone columns, crystal chandeliers, velvet curtains the color of deep wine. It was the kind of place where history was made. And the other competitors. There were 12 of them in the special category. Musicians from all over the world who had overcome their own challenges to be there. But when Elena watched them warm up, when she heard them practice in the side rooms, her confidence began to crack. They were good. Really good. Some of them seemed to have barely any limitations at all. Their fingers flew across the keyboards with speed and precision that Elena could only dream of. What was she doing here? Who did she think she was? She found a quiet corner backstage and sat down, trying to calm her racing heart. Her right hand was already starting to cramp from the stress. Not a good sign. A young woman with a prosthetic arm sat down next to her. She was one of the other competitors. From somewhere in Northern Europe, she had lost her arm in an accident as a teenager and had taught herself to play piano with one hand and a specially designed prosthetic. Nervous? The woman asked. Elena nodded, terrified. The woman smiled. Good. That means you care. She looked out at the stage, visible through a gap in the curtains. You know what I tell myself before every performance? I am not here to prove I am the best. I am here to prove that I exist. That I survived. That they did not beat me. She turned back to Elena. Whatever happens out there tonight, you have already won. You made it here. After everything you went through, you made it here. No one can ever take that away from you. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. She nodded, unable to speak. The woman patted her on the shoulder and walked away. Elena sat there alone, thinking about those words, thinking about everything that had brought her to this moment. The little girl at her grandmother's broken piano. The teenager who practiced 8 hours a day. The young woman whose dreams were shattered by 4 terrible words. Never play again. In a few hours, she would walk onto that stage and show the world what those words really meant. Nothing. They meant nothing at all. The concert hall held 1,200 people. Elena knew this because she had counted the seats from backstage, trying to calm her nerves by focusing on something concrete. 1,200 red velvet chairs arranged in perfect rows, stretching back into the shadows of the balcony. 1,200 strangers who had come to watch musicians like her bare their souls. She was the last performer of the evening. The competition organizers had done this on purpose. They told her that her story was special, that they wanted to end the night with something the audience would never forget. At the time, it had felt like an honor. Now, standing in the wings with her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears, it felt like a curse. She had watched the other performers go before her. 11 musicians, each with their own story of struggle and survival. A man who had lost 3 fingers and learned to play with the remaining 7. A woman who was completely blind and had memorized every piece by touch alone. A teenager who had been told he would never walk, let alone sit at a piano, and had proved everyone wrong. They were all incredible, every single one of them, and now it was her turn. A stagehand appeared beside her. 2 minutes, he whispered. Elena nodded. Her mouth was too dry to speak. She looked down at her hands. Her left hand was steady, ready. Her right hand trembled slightly, the fingers curling inward in that familiar way that signaled trouble. She took a deep breath and consciously relaxed the muscles. Not now. Please, not now. She thought about her grandmother. who had passed away the year before but who had lived long enough to see Elena return to music. She thought about her mother and father, who were sitting somewhere in that audience right now, holding hands, praying for their daughter. She thought about Professor Morales, who had believed in her even when she did not believe in herself. She thought about the little girl who had touched the keys of a broken piano for the first time and discovered a world of magic inside herself. That little girl was still in there somewhere, scared but brave, uncertain but determined. "You can do this," Elena whispered to herself. "You have already done the hardest part. You survived." The stagehand touched her arm. "It is time." Elena stepped out of the wings and into the light. The walk to the piano felt like it took forever. She was aware of every footstep, every breath, every heartbeat. The stage lights were blinding. The audience was a dark sea of faces she could not see, but she could feel them watching her, 1,200 pairs of eyes following her every move. She reached the piano. A beautiful Steinway grand, polished to a mirror shine, waiting for her like an old friend. She sat down on the bench, adjusted her position, placed her feet on the pedals. For a moment, she just sat there, letting the silence settle around her. The audience held its breath. The whole world seemed to pause. Then Elena placed her hands on the keys, and she began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 floated out into the hall like a whispered secret. Soft, delicate, almost fragile. Her left hand carried the melody while her right hand added gentle support, the fingers moving carefully, deliberately, never pushing too hard. The music grew. It swelled and expanded, filling every corner of the massive concert hall. Elena closed her eyes and let herself disappear into the sound. She was not thinking about technique anymore. She was not thinking about her hands or her limitations or the 1,200 people watching her. She was thinking about her story. The opening passage was her childhood. Simple, pure, full of wonder. The melody climbed and danced, like a little girl discovering magic for the first time. Then came the darker section. The music turned heavy, troubled. Her left hand rumbled in the lower register while her right hand cried out in the upper notes. This was the diagnosis. The despair. The 2 years of silence when she thought she would never play again. She felt tears building behind her closed eyes. But she did not stop. The music demanded to be played. The story demanded to be told. The piece shifted again. A new theme emerged. Tentative at first, then growing stronger. This was her recovery. Her rebuilding. The long nights of practice and the small victories that had led her back to life. Her left hand moved with confidence now, carrying passages that should have required both hands, defying everything the doctors had said was possible. And then came the climax. The music exploded into a cascade of sound. Elena's fingers flew across the keys, her left hand doing the work of two while her right hand contributed what it could. She had rewritten this section herself, redistributing the notes in ways that no one had ever tried before. It was not how Chopin had composed it, but it was how Elena needed to play it. It was her version, her truth, her survival transformed into sound. The final passage approached. Elena could feel her right hand starting to cramp, the muscles threatening to lock up. Not yet. Please, not yet. Just a few more measures. She pushed through. Note after note. Phrase after phrase. Pouring everything she had left into the music. The last chord rang out across the concert hall, and then there was silence. Elena sat frozen at the piano, her hands still resting on the keys, her whole body trembling. She did not know if she had played well. She did not know if she had made mistakes. She only knew that she had given everything she had, every ounce of pain, every drop of hope, every piece of her shattered and rebuilt heart. The silence stretched on. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3, and then someone in the audience stood up, then another person, and another, and another. Within moments, all 1,200 people were on their feet. The applause started like distant thunder and grew into a roaring wave that crashed over the stage. People were cheering. People were crying. Elena saw a woman in the front row wiping tears from her face with both hands. She looked out at the audience, still unable to process what was happening. In the middle of the crowd, she spotted her mother and father. Her mother was sobbing openly. Her father, who never showed emotion, had tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. Elena finally let her own tears fall. She stood up from the piano and bowed, her legs shaking so badly she thought she might collapse. The applause continued. It went on for 1 minute. Then 2. Then 3. People were shouting her name. Someone threw flowers onto the stage. She had done it. Against all odds. Against every prediction. Against the 4 words that had nearly destroyed her. She had done it. Later that night, after the results were announced, Elena did not win first place. That honor went to the blind woman from Japan, whose performance had been technically flawless. Elena came in 4th, but standing on that stage, holding her small trophy, surrounded by musicians who understood exactly what she had been through, Elena realized something important. She had not come to Warsaw to win a competition. She had come to prove that the human spirit cannot be broken. That music lives not in perfect hands but in an unbreakable heart. That the word never is just a challenge waiting to be overcome. Today, Elena Vasquez performs around the world. She has released 3 albums of piano music, all featuring her unique adaptive technique. She teaches masterclasses for injured musicians, helping them find their own paths back to the music they love. On the wall of her studio, she keeps a small framed piece of paper. It is a copy of the medical report from 5 years ago, with 4 words highlighted in yellow. Never play again. She looks at it every day. Not to remember the pain, but to remember the lesson. Some people hear, never, and give up. Some people hear, never, and get to work. Elena chose to get to work. And in the end, that made all the difference, because the music was never in her hands. It was always in her soul. And souls, unlike hands, cannot be broken.